Thank you very much, Kevin, for introducing me this morning. Can we give an applause to Kevin for being able to stand in front of plenty of us? I know it is not fun, so. And exactly as he said, so today I've titled my presentation, Scotland, the Brain of Britain. And so I'm going to take the time today to explain to you some different aspects of Scottish culture and how our education system leads to what I believe is Scotland is the brain of Britain, right? I'm going to take you today through three main topics of my presentation here. Sorry. So I will share this for you. So we're going to start with you getting to know me a little more, since I love an opportunity to talk about myself almost as much as I do to talk about Scotland. Afterwards, I want to explain to you some important linguistic aspects of the Scottish accent and languages, right? Then we'll move on towards thinking about why I've decided to title this presentation Scotland, the Brain of Britain, right? There are 4 countries that comprise the United Kingdom, and so it could be seen as a bit ostentatious for me to claim that Scotland would be the brain of Britain, but I'm going to prove you why I'm allowed to say that. So as Kevin mentioned, I'm originally from Scotland, and I've now lived here in Temuco for 3 years, working as an English teacher and support or language assistant in the Universidad de La Frontera and la Universidad Católica de Temuco. But I also have a master's in archival sciences. So I'm not just obsessed with languages and books, I'm also obsessed with old things. So I have a great excuse for leaving my house a mess constantly, right? And so we're going to start by talking about language and linguistics in the beginning, right? I know that many of you are truly enthused by a Scottish accent whenever you come to your conversations with me, right? And so while this is not the stereotypical accent, I will definitely show you my secret accent that I hide in a box sometimes. I'd like you to shout at me though, what do you know about Scotland? What are some of the things that you know? What are some things? We just don't exist. Yeah, tell me. She has been paying my bills for years. Yes, Mary Queen of Scots. One of the reasons I went to work with archives is because of Mary Queen of Scots. Amazing. The last royal family member coming and reigning in the seats of Scotland. Anyone else? Okay. So like I mentioned, one of the things that comes up often is we talk pretty funny, right? We have some strange accents and sounds. And I feel like I need to give you a little context beforehand, right? Everyone in the UK speaks weird, right? We're a very small country with 48 recognized accents of English, right? And so I implore you to please, the British Library has an accessible link where you can take a virtual phonetic tour of the UK. You can visit the website and click on some of these pins to hear an English speaker telling stories of their memories at school and how they sound different from London and Bath or from different parts of Scotland, right? Now, Scotland in particular has a very special case. You can see at the top here, I've left you what I would refer to as the Scottish English continuum, right? In Scotland, we have a very specific type of accents, right? And so some people are arguing that actually what people speak in Scotland, is not an accent nor a dialect, but another language completely, right? And depending on which parts of Scotland you travel to, you are able to see the change and the move away from English in the way that this person speaks. So while in the south or central belt of Scotland, near Glasgow or Edinburgh, the way that the person speaks Scots looks much more English, when you get to the islands of the north, sometimes even I cannot understand a sentence that is being written, right? And so I think with that, I'm able to take you through some of the key components of some traditional Scottish accents. When people speak of the Scottish accent, any British-made resource that you're going to look at about phonetics or linguistic relevancies to the UK will always mention the Scottish accent, but there is not one. There are many. Even my lovely mother is here, you would be able to hear the difference in our own accents, right? So Scotland as a country has 4 officially recognized languages. There's English, Scots, Gaelic from the islands of the north, and then British Sign Language. So 3 oral languages and 1 physical language, right? There are 14 recognized forms of English accent alone in Scotland. So of those 48 accents in the UK I mentioned, 14 of them are different types of Scottish accent. And some of these accents vary only slightly, some of them hugely, right? The 2 most stereotypical accents are most accessible to us in this lovely modern age where we can get everything online whenever we want are Glaswegian accents coming from the city of Glasgow and the west of the country, and Edinburgh accents coming from the east and the capital city of Edinburgh, right? So Scottish accents in general, but particularly the Glaswegian accent, are very rhotic accents. Does anyone like to remember their phonetics and tell us what rhotic means? Okay. So R is strong. We are always pronouncing, yeah, thank you. So we are always pronouncing R in consonant clusters, right? As opposed to a flat American accent where someone is going to say something like water, right? We would say water. So the R is always the strongest sound in our language. To an extent where if I say this word, how would you pronounce this? And how many syllables are in this word? In my accent, there's 2. Ghetto. 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 The R is so strong, it will force me to create another consonant in the word. Water. Ghetto. World. Storm. All of these R sounds are forcing me to adopt another syllable sound. We also have a lovely distinction between W and WH words, right? So if I write here this word, how would you pronounce this? And this word? To me, they're not the same. Which, what, who, why. We overpronounce the H at the beginning of a sound, and often the more you do so, the higher class you appear. And so you will notice some people trying very hard to make very strong aspirations of a H sound at the beginning of a word. And that often shows you who's a social climber and who really speaks like that, right? We also have a lovely component that's so well studied in Glaswegian Scots, because it comes from French languages also. And so again, we like to look fancy and European, which is known as the glottal stop, right? Do we know where your glot is? Okay, so in the back of your throat, a word, for example, like this one. How would you say this? Bar. I am incapable of pronouncing the T's in the middle. Bar. Because the glottal at the back of my throat will stop it. There is no sound whatsoever emerging from what I say, right? And so I am from the west coast of Scotland, not quite Glasgow. So I am West Coast accent. And therefore, there are many similarities like WH and the glottal stop, but also I will have a glottal drop at the end of ing words. So I would never say sitting or dancing. I will say sitting, dancing. And I will eat the G sound at the end of a word, right? This is in huge contrast to the Edinburgh accent, which is typically known as the Scottish accent, right? Sometimes referred to as SSE, meaning Standard Scottish English, because at the unification of England and Scotland in 1707, lots of very fancy English people decided to go and live in Edinburgh. That affected their accents heavily. And so it sounds a lot more like RP English, but they retain the rhetoric elements, the erotic elements of Glaswegian accents, right? We also have the Scottish vowel rule. So if I have the opportunity to make a word look longer, I will. Here, how will we say this? And this one? Similar, right? Especially in a flat American accent. We have sure, 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 right? So there's an opportunity here for me to make a vowel sound longer, especially by adding E at the end. And so sure. And I love when my students ask me, how can I speak to in a British accent? And I think, well, pick one first. You have so many of them to go through. I want you to find one and decide which you want to speak in, right? What I've mentioned so far has been mostly accent discussions. But what's the difference between a dialect and a language? Does anyone remember? Now you're shy. So dialects are normally a variance of a language. So people speaking two dialects of English would be able to understand one another, whereas two people speaking different languages don't tend to understand one another, right? You can speak to someone from Brazil, and in Portuguese and Spanish, there are some similar words with the same roots, but you're not going to understand them. So some people argue that in Scotland, Scots is not a language, it's a dialect, right? And if this principle of, well, two speakers of the same language with different dialects can understand one another, I present to you this theory then. So in the south of England, the south of England included, and also the south of Scotland, you will hear someone say something like, my father built that when we were children, right? But in the north of Scotland, you will hear my father big when we were just peedyhings. Okay? Is it a dialect or another language? Right. If you think that you're going to have a conversation with someone in the north of Scotland and understand everything they say, perhaps we have to rethink how linguistics works, right? But particularly because a lot of English linguistic academics have came from Britain, they have told Scotland over and over and over again, no, you're not speaking another language, you're just speaking badly, right? Which maybe Chileans can feel a little identified with in the way that your Spanish works. And it's why this is the country Spanish that I've chosen is my default. Now I think it is the greatest kind that we could ever have, right? But this varies massively across the country. I think in the center of Scotland, some people would be able to understand this and some not. Some of these words like feather, I would use in my normal day-to-day speech, but I would never say bigot. And so that's why at the beginning, I showed you this continuum of English and Scots. As you move up the country, more and more words from Scots become integrated into the language. And this stereotype of Scots people speak badly is often because Scots people have been lied to so often that they don't know they're speaking Scots. They're mixing two languages in their own speech, especially in large cities like Glasgow or Edinburgh. So you may wonder why I've decided then to call this the brain of Britain. And what on earth goes on in a country where even inside the country, people can't understand each other, right? I have met people from an hour's drive away from my town and I don't have a single clue what they're saying to me sometimes. And what happens is we're geniuses. I guarantee you, you go home today and you cannot see something, you cannot enter your house without seeing things that came from Scotland, right? The TV, made in Scotland. The refrigerator, made in Scotland. Trains, made in Scotland. Radars, made in Scotland. Even cloning, genetically cloning the thing of sci-fi novels, made in Scotland, right? And even things like the telephone and the word hello come from Scotland. And so despite being told for a very long period of time, no, you speak badly, no, you're not very smart, yeah, you like to drink a lot of alcohol, which some is lies, some is not. Scotland has been able to produce wonderful things. If you go to the Wikipedia page for things invented in Scotland, it's one of the largest Wikipedia pages available on the internet. And that's why I argue that Scotland is the brain of Britain, right? The flushing toilet, made in Scotland. I could go on forever. Antibiotics, made in Scotland. Sewing machines, made in Scotland, right? And so you have a little nation of people who with one town to the next can't understand one another, but they're able to make these groundbreaking things that completely revolutionize the way that we live today, right? If you go to the Museo Ferroviario here in Temuco, 3 of those trains directly from Scotland. One of them made in a town just outside of mine, right? We are everywhere. We're like cockroaches that just refuse to go away. And we're a country the size of the Región de Arica. So these contributions are huge. And we need to think, how were those able to happen, right? This often emerges historically, but also now. I'm not to be unbiased, but Scotland continues to hit well above its weight in contributing to science, maths, technology, language, arts. But this stems from a period of time called the Scottish Enlightenment. Has anyone heard of the European Enlightenment? Yeah? So a period of time between the 17th and 18th century in which Europe began to widely spread books and share information. Scotland's was so important, it got its own special version. The Enlightenment 2.0, the Scotland edition, was essentially what happened, right? So does anyone know any famous universities from the UK? Can you pardon? Can you shout me a British university that's very famous? Oxford, yeah. Cambridge. So while England at the time of the Enlightenment had just those 2 universities, Scotland already had 5. And they were more successful, larger than Oxford or Cambridge, right? Scotland's sheer sharing of knowledge and wealth of inventions came from how early Scotland began to invest in education. From the very beginning of this time, we're talking before the 1600s, we had 5 ancient universities that still function today. They had a network of parish schools. The church had been reformed so many times in Scotland that it became an integral part to our education. Every young boy from any family of any class was able to access free education in their town and better their own situation or their families through parish education. This moment of integrating the church and the education system with the state allowed a huge boom in access to knowledge, right? It got to such a point where a very French philosopher, Voltaire, that some of you may know, some not, said this quotation: "We look to Scotland for all of our ideas of civilization." Imagine being such a tiny country and a whole continent is obsessed with you. That's amazing. And the Scottish Enlightenment indeed led to so many important figures that completely changed how we see the world today. And this is only 4 of them. Another huge list on Wikipedia are Scottish Enlightenment figures, right? We have Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. So how governments run their financial situation today comes from Scotland. The father of modern geology, so our studies of the earth and the creation of the most accurate globe, Scotland. We have Joseph Black being the father of modern chemistry, and so on. Mathematics, sociology, anthropology, they were all born in Scotland. The Renaissance became a moment in which we questioned everything. Yes, religion and education were what were leading us, but should we believe in blind faith? Or should we question with reason and logic why we are doing things? And this was what developed to how our modern world looks today, all stemming from Scotland. And this is only a historical context, right? Even today, Scotland continues to invest heavily in education. And so now, Scotland, in the modern period, has a completely integrated education system. In 2001, the Scottish government implemented its curriculum for excellence. And so we need to remember, and from 1707 until 1999, Scotland lost its government, and they were not able to govern themselves until it was re-established in 1999. And from that moment on, Scotland completely transformed education once again, just as it did in the 18th century. So now, the curriculum for excellence is a values and capabilities-based education system. Children do not receive a single assessment until they are 15 years old. From the day that they enter primary school to halfway through high school, you will never receive a test. We do not perform or look at students via their grades, but rather we have 4 competencies or 4 values that the school is looking to instill and develop in children. So these competencies are to be a successful learner, my apologies, a responsible citizen, an effective contributor, and a confident individual. Why would we choose to teach values? What does that do? If we are looking to send our kids to university, yes, we should be making them take tests, we should be preparing them to get there, but Scottish education is not looking to do that. Scottish education wants them to be ready for life. And so by the end of school, a child should be ready to join the workforce, to pay their taxes, to contribute to their society, right? We are not looking to have children go to university. The curriculum that we have created also holds these values, which must be provided by all schools or they will fail inspections, right? So a school must provide students with opportunities for learning and personal development. An ethos and life of the school as a community. We have adopted this kind of Protestant root ideology of if you invest in your community, you invest in everything around you, and therefore you grow with the community that's there, right? We have interdisciplinary learning. Very rarely did I ever have, okay, for 1 hour you have mathematics, and for 1 hour you have biology. No. Often they would mix these classes together. Like today we're going to talk about the Egyptians, and we learn how to write hieroglyphics, and then we're digging in sand looking for artifacts that would be Egyptian. So that students are using all of their different types of intelligence and different kinds of skills in order to develop the outcomes or the successful learning outcome of that teacher's class, right? The last part is to look for curriculum areas and subjects. And our curriculum areas are vast. When I learned that here in Chile, you often choose to be a humanista or you study sciences, we study everything for as long as possible until you're dragged away from it. And I can't imagine what it would have been like for me to be pigeonholed into one of these boxes. Perhaps it has its benefits. When I was good at biology at school and good at English and good at social sciences, but terrible at mathematics. And so being able to play with the parts that I liked and continue studying them was also a huge strength of that education system, right? So subject areas in Scotland that must be covered by schools include expressive arts. So things like sewing and fashion design, or traditional painting and clay making. We have health and well-being, which is part of our courses for life. So a child receives health and well-being education from the first day they enter primary school until the last day they finish high school. And of course, those topics are adjusted for each age group to be appropriate, whether that's the food pyramid or sexual education, right? We have languages, so English or Gaelic normally, but also foreign languages like French, Spanish, German. We have the mathematics courses, which may be applied or purely theoretical, depending on the abilities of the child, right? We have social sciences, so like politics, geography, history, religious and moral education, where we study all religions that are represented in the UK, which are a vast amount, and then philosophy for ethical education. We have the hard sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, and vocational skills, right? So some of my classmates learned to be a hairdresser while we were at school. And so when they finished school, they left and got a job as a hairdresser. Or they studied car mechanics. And by the time we finished school, they were ready to be mechanics. There was no need to go to university for a vocational degree, right? Technologies ensure that our education system is constantly adapting to new technologies that we see here, right? I've been talking to some of you this week about AI and its place in classes, right? And so our education system was made in order to be flexible enough to incorporate these tools as resources in the classroom, right? But this is an integrated education system from primary to secondary. My curriculum never changed. Once I got to the end of my high school experience, I began receiving exams the first period of time. When you are 15, you may take the first round of exams, which allow you to get your high school diploma to say, these are the skills and abilities I have. And with that, students can leave school and begin to enter the workforce. They may be qualified in car mechanics or beauticians. And so you've already created a stable workforce before they reach the age of 18, right? So what does that leave for the kids who don't want to go and work, like me? That leaves us an extra 2 years to take courses and education for university preparation, right? So for us, the university is not like Chile, where you have a vocational preparation degree. We study academic subjects. I did not specifically study English teaching. I studied literature and linguistics, and I was able to take specialism courses in being a teacher, right? We don't receive this kind of very specific education that you do where you come here to get a job and you go. No, we get quite a wide, broad education. And that goal towards broad education has also what allowed Scotland to flourish before and continue to flourish, making contributions now. So in the first year, or when finishing high school, my apologies, you will apply to university through a system which we call UCAS, right? Depending on the exam results of your school exams in order to get there. Some universities have higher standards than others. And I mentioned those 5 old universities that we had then. Those are called the 5 ancient universities. So they are known for having the highest level of exigencia, demand from their students, and therefore have higher expectations upon entry, right? You would then apply, and the ancient universities have an ancient MA. So in America, this continent, you tend to refer to an MA as a master in the arts, right? But the ancient universities teach your undergraduate degrees at the level of master's intelligence. You are looking at master's level work for your undergraduate degree. And that's why their demand from students is much higher than the modern universities of Scotland, right? In Scotland, we are very different to the rest of the UK. Again, we value broad education. We want to support that students experiment in as many different fields as possible so they have the highest opportunities to be successful in learning, right? The average undergraduate degree will last 4 years long. And in the first 2 years, you have a lot of flexibility about what you may be able to study. I'll show you briefly what a study plan would look like in a university in Scotland so we can get an idea of how that experience would be, right? We have 2 semesters every year for university, and they are much shorter than here. So I miss sometimes being able to sit at home a lot more than I do now. We tend to start in September and then finish in December for the first semester, the middle of December, and then beginning again in the middle of January until May time, where you would have your final exams for each round of courses, right? Your contact time, the time in which you see a teacher, varies massively depending on the type of degree you study. So we do have some vocational degrees that are common the world over, right? Medicine, law, nursing, and those tend to have the most contact time because they are professions which require specialist knowledge, and so you must work with these specialists to develop the skills. You're looking at 32 hours a week in university, right? In the hard science degrees, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, you have some labs during the day and some lectures, and so a little more time, a little less time, 28 hours per week. And then in an arts and humanities degree like mine, 15 hours a week maximum. You're assigned so much autonomous work in an arts and humanities degree because the expectation is that you know what to do. You got here for a reason. And so I would maybe have 1 or 2 hours of class in one day of the week, but I had 15 books to read for that 1 or 2 hours of class. And I go to discuss it, right? I've been kind of repeatedly mentioning broad and flexible education. You can probably tell by now I'm an avid fan. I think it was hugely successful for my experience, but also for the peers and people I've seen graduate around me. But remember that these Scottish universities are huge. 50,000 foreign students come to Scotland to study every year. In the first year of my classes, I had 500 classmates. There were 36 modules or sections, however you want to call them, for my 1 year alone. I still meet people I had never known for my entire degree that we graduated and took some of the same classes, right? So to me, it was amazing to be able to come to a course, know all of my students' names within the first year here. I think it's wonderful that I will be able to remember who you are, right? When you enter your 4 years of study in a Scottish undergraduate degree, they are structured to an extent. And the first year is all about the state of modern academia. What is relevant in your field of study? What do you need to know to be a successful academic or student working in that field right now? What are your professors talking about? And how can you engage in that conversation? We work in a credits-based system, and so you accumulate credits with your courses over the years, and you have to reach a total of 480 in order to graduate, right? You enter and you take, when you apply for your course, you apply specifically for a degree. So for example, I applied for biochemistry. I entered university studying biochemistry, and that was my first level 1 course. That was made for me, and I couldn't choose to change it. But then you choose 2 other level 1 courses. One has to be from the same faculty, and one, that being science, technology, English, math, vocational, etc. And then one of whatever. So I took Portuguese from the languages department, and then linguistics and literature. And after that first year, realized I really liked literature and linguistics. And so I changed my entire degree. I was rewarded by the flexible education system in exploring something new and trying something different, right? So I originally entered and was forced to make a decision when I was 18 about what I wanted to study, but it wasn't set in stone. I was able to move around within that, yeah? You move to the secondary and take level 2 or level 1 courses, and level 2 courses are all about the history and development of your field. In order to be a successful academic or scholar on your subject, you must know its origins. You must know the influential figures of who created that field, why we do things the way we do, right? You may mix as many level 2 courses as you want, or you may choose to take some new level 1 courses to explore further. And so we have the concept of the eternal student. Some people who constantly take level 1 courses and realize, oh, I really like that. No, I really like that. No, I really like that. And they end up going back to trying everything before they actually finish their degree, right? In 3rd and 4th year, we have what's called the honors system. And so this is not like when in the US people refer to majors and minors. This is where you've finally decided what you're going to study and you're going to specialize within it. So even within my literature and linguistics program, I still had 20 different courses in which I could pick to study. Some people love teaching grammar. Some people love phonetics. Some people choose to enjoy discourse, right? This is where you decide what you're going to do. For example, phonetics, I made my base. I was never a big fan, sorry. Whereas I am much more of a grammar person, right? And so I was able to enjoy teaching grammar courses when I wanted, or learning grammar courses. Finally, you move to taking further specialization courses, sometimes vocational in nature. Things like humanities in the classroom. How do you teach arts? This is where you begin to get experience in the modern workplace based on your degree. One of my courses was memorializing culture. So I was working in a museum as the course, right? You don't have a class anymore. You are sent to an institution and that's your course. Much like when you have your professional practice here, but I was going to a school 1 day a week and then going to a museum the other day of the week and applying the knowledge I had gained over those 4 years in different contexts, right? You also finally have your undergraduate thesis, which are mandatory to graduate from the degree and always done alone. You are assigned 2 different people who will guide you in your thesis. One will be the main go-between. You converse with them in order to come up with your plan. The second will be an academic from outside of your field who wants to make sure you are able to critically think and write about a topic that is understandable to everyone. They do not have the specialist knowledge that you do, and therefore must be able to understand your text, right? This kind of broad and flexible education system is the reflection of ancient Scotland that made us so great, right? The origins of that Renaissance, those inventions, they continue to happen thanks to this system. Education is free in Scotland. It is very difficult to find a private school. There are 5 in total, I believe, and the royal family use a lot of them. And afterwards, university undergraduate education is also free for the first 5 years. So not only are we giving you the opportunity to study an entire degree for free, but if you mess up and decide that you want to do something else for a year, you have that fail-safe, right? But because of how flexible this system is, it very rarely happens. You're able to explore your options when you go to your degree. And sure, it's a huge cost that the government is giving all of these young people possibilities to go to university. And so how do we combat that? That good, broad, flexible, integrated high school system. Some people know they don't want to go to university. Prepare them for work. If we create a school system that only looks to get you to university, to out of their classroom into another classroom, you're not creating a complete and total education system. Right? And so I think this kind of broad and flexible education is what allows me to argue that Scotland is the brain of Britain. To sum up, I think that the continued development of education and its history and origin have always allowed us to ensure that a nation that didn't understand each other all the time was successful from the very beginning and continues to be today. I think integrating values for a society that is modern, that's developed and successful into education ensures that we achieve that as a modern society from the beginning. And finally, that our commitment to broad education will allow me to say for certain that you can forget all about England and that Scotland is the brain of Britain. Thank you.
Okay, guys. So it's time for questions. So if you have one, please raise your hand and participate. And if you are participating online, please write your question on the chat so we can read them here. Please don't use
I promise I don't bite. Hi, yes.
You mentioned a very important point about the interpretation system. Can you tell us about the disadvantages?
Absolutely, very good question. It has came under many criticisms over the years, and we've adapted to it several times, to the point that Denmark and Norway stole the system and then made it better. One of the biggest, like they normally do. One of the biggest problems is that a child doesn't receive exams or formal assessment until they're 15, right? And those exams or assessments are for you to get a high school diploma. So sometimes a student doesn't know they are bad at exams until it's too late. They've taken their first round of exams and gotten a bad high school diploma, right? I think this flexibility is often also regarded as too flexible for some people. Giving students so many options means that they will never commit to something. And therefore, we have a fear of being able to try hard at something and do it over and over and over again. But I'm not sure that criticism stands so well. Very good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Do you think that system should be used in Chile?
Pardon? It should be used in Chile? I would love to see it, but I think we also need to place in context, right? I think one of the bonuses and the reasons it works so well in Scotland is that public education is much more widely available and integrated than private. Chile is already working against many factors here. You have curriculums that are different from city to city, even within a city. We would need to establish some kind of board first that would be able to address that. Although my awareness of the Chilean education system is not the best. I would like to see it, but I think we're a while off, right? Any other questions?
Are some questions on the chat? Oh God.
Good. Perfect. Sorry. Yes. Hi.
Well, I'm curious about the relationship between the church and the religion.
Yeah. Okay.
Really well known that the church
Okay. So I think historically the church was super important in the development of education, and it left a lot of schools which could later be bought by the state and used. But nowadays, the state is completely secular. The school is not involved in most public education, though there are Catholic schools. And they are rare, but they exist and they still must teach other religions. I mentioned that religious education is compulsory. So it's one of our courses for life. You must study it from the day you enter primary school to the day you end high school. And so we spend 8 weeks learning about a different religion. And then after those 8 weeks, you visit a place of worship related to that religion. You spend 8 weeks learning about Islam, and then you go to a mosque. 8 weeks learning about Judaism, and then you go to a synagogue. And so we are given a very wide awareness of religion, but only in Catholic schools are you also taught to interpret the Bible, where you are given a text to read, and why is this text valuable? I did not go to a Catholic school, so I can't give you as much insight, and I'm not qualified to teach in one, because they have a different qualification system. Once you finish your undergraduate degree, if you want to teach in a Catholic school, you have to study a certain diploma in order to do so. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Any others? Yes.
You talk about teaching values. Is this value, there's some norm or program? I mean, because what is really about, moral values, or do you study philosophy? How do you do that?
So when we talk about these values that the system has, the curriculum for excellence was created by the Ministry of Education. And they spent 3 years creating the project from 1991 to 2001. So those values, 1999, sorry, to 2001. And those values were collected by teachers, parents, and community members as to what would make a successful child, like the confident individual, contributor to society, and so on. And those were the 4 key values that were identified. We are made to study philosophy. And so with religious education, we are also made to study philosophy until we finish, because if you're not getting your ethical values or compass from religion, where can you look to also find ethics? Philosophy. Good question. Do I answer your question? Yes, thank you. Great question. Any others?
Yes, I would like to know if, what are the most taught languages in schools, and if there are opportunities for Spanish speakers to go to teach Spanish there.
Absolutely, the essential question. Yes, so in Scotland, French and Spanish are the most common second languages taught in school. French because of the Old Alliance. So Scotland and France, their royal families used to marry each other, and so we like to integrate them. But actually, my Spanish teacher at school was Spanish. Oftentimes, you can come in after 6 months of study, you receive an MED, so a Master's in Education, which certifies you to teach in high school establishments. So often, English teachers like yourselves learn and adapt their linguistic skills to how do I teach my own language, and then move to the UK in order to teach their own language. Scotland needs the population, please. We're in decline, and leaving Europe really did us bad damage. Please move to Scotland. Yes, tell me.
I don't know if it's like a completely related question, but I was thinking, how does Scotland deal with like special education students? Because I think it's like a really important topic, especially here in Chile, because we don't have like a specific way to deal with special education students besides like special schools, which I think are not really the best option to have. So
I completely agree with you. I think Scotland's approach to teaching is that a teacher must be prepared for all opportunities. So often your language teacher at school is part of a support network with a social worker, a psychologist, and any medical staff that work with a staff student. And therefore, we regularly attend meetings where we have to face any additional support needs that a student may have, because all students should be able to enter a normal classroom. The value behind this being in your entire life in society, you will have to live with people who have different capabilities and different abilities as you do. And so why should we segregate them at such a young age? When you're an adult, you're going to have to learn to get back together. There are some very specialized centers for students to study when their additional support needs cannot be managed by a teacher. And usually these are also run in conjunction with the national health system. And so we're looking more at terminal illnesses or certain illnesses that need treatment like constant dialysis. So a nurse would be more useful sometimes than a teacher in those contexts. But for the most part, Scotland seeks to integrate every single student where possible into the classroom. And that's why we have those vocational classes, because some students don't feel capable of pursuing academic courses, but why should we send them to a vocational school when in 10 years' time you're going to know a hairdresser and you have to live and work with a hairdresser? You might even marry one. So why segregate yourself now? Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.